Hi, I'm Abby with the Heirloom Farmer, and today I'm going to share how I do my soil blocking process to start seeds for our small scale greenhouse. I started soil blocking a few years ago. I really love it and have almost completely transitioned all of my seed starting to soil blocks. And I wanted to share this video because when I started soil blocking, I felt like all of the tutorials I watched made it way too complicated. And so I didn't start soil blocking for a while because I was like, this is just too confusing and too much and all the things. So I finally started soil blocking and I was like, you know what? This is so much easier and way less complicated than everybody made it seem. So I want to share a video with you of my soil blocking process, how easy it actually is, and how you can get started with really just minimal, basic equipment. And yeah, I highly recommend you give it a try for starting seeds this year. And if you have questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to do a run through of my process. There are many ways to do it. This is what works for me. This is how I start thousands of seedlings every year. So I hope this helps and encourages you to start soil blocking yourself. Coffee is always a good idea. All right. So when it comes to soil blocking equipment, you really only need a few basics. Honestly, if you have a soil blocker, this is hang on, let me back up just a minute. You might be saying, wait a minute, what is soil blocking? I should explain that. So soil blocking is using soil, a potting medium, to make little compressed squares or blocks of soil that sit in a tray or on a plate or whatever you want it to sit on, something solid it can sit on. And you start your seeds and plants in that block of soil. There's no pots, there's no cell blocks, there's no trays that surround each individual pot of soil. It is literally just a block of soil that your seeds go in and your plants grow in. And there's a lot of benefits to it. A few of the benefits that I like is you have way fewer trays. You don't have a bunch of cell trays to clean. Less plastic, and I think it's much healthier for the plants. And one of the reasons I say that is actually two reasons. So one, you can better control your moisture. You can see the entire block and see, is it wet the whole way through? Is it damp, the whole way down? Is the whole entire thing dry? And also, as the roots hit the edge of the soil block, they do what's called air prune. So the roots stop growing at that point, and they don't become as root bound or pot bound as they might in a cell tray. So there's a lot more reasons to it than that, but that's the basics of what a soil block is. And another reason you might want to soil block, another reason that I soil block, is because it saves a lot of space. So you can start a lot of seeds in a very small space with a minimal amount of trays and equipment. All right, so now back to what you need to actually get started making your own soil blocks. So you will need a soil blocker. If you're just getting started, maybe you're not sure if you really want to do this or how much you're going to want to do it, I recommend just getting one soil blocker. Probably the 2-inch size is a good one to get started with. And I can put some links below on where you can get them. But yeah, just this is going to be your biggest investment to get started, is one of these soil blockers. But just get one, and you can get started with just one size. I do have two. I have this small mini. It makes 20 little tiny blocks, and I do like using both, but you don't have to have the mini to get started. The other thing that you're gonna need is a seed starting mix, a potting medium, whatever you want to call it. I use ProMix Organic, but you can use other seed starting mixes. This is where, when I first started looking into soil blocking, I got overwhelmed because a lot of people said you have to have a special mix, you have to make your own recipe and add in all these things so that the soil blocks hold together, and it just sounded super overwhelming. But I found that using the right amount of moisture and the right technique, I can just use this regular potting mix. So that is what I use. Again, I use ProMix Organic. You don't have to use it, and it can sometimes be difficult to get in small quantities. I get giant 70-pound bales of it as a professional grower, but it's not as important what you use as I originally thought. So get a good quality organic potting mix, and I think that's it. But I do say good quality. You don't want to scrimp on getting cheap potting mix, because this is what provides the nutrients for your seedlings, and you want to make sure that it's a clean, healthy, good potting mix. And I always opt for organic, and then we do add some of our own worm castings to the mix, but that has nothing to do with the soil blocking. You can do it with or without worm castings. That's just for the health of our plants. All right, so you need the soil blocker, you need the potting mix, and you're gonna need water and a container to put your potting mix in that's big enough for your soil blocker and that has a solid flat bottom. So I do have this nice tray that I got from Johnny's that I invested in after I had been soil blocking for years, but I originally just started out with a plastic container. Again, it just needs to be big enough for your soil blocker to hold your soil and have a solid bottom that you can push down on, and you'll see why in a minute. And then you're also going to need water. I keep milk jugs of water that I add in as needed. And you're gonna need something to put the soil blocks on. Now, again, after I had been doing this for a few years, I invested in trays specific for seed starting, but you can use all kinds of things. My husband actually 3D printed me some of these little trays for a few blocks. You can use plates. I've seen a lot of people use cafeteria trays, just anything that has a space that's going to hold your soil blocks and that you can water your plants and your soil blocks on. There's a lot of optional things you can do, but really just to get started, use a tray, a plate, a cookie sheet, something that's going to hold your soil blocks. And honestly, that is all you really need to get started. Some other optional things, again, like I said, this tray was nice to have. It has the lower front, it holds a bunch of soil, it's really nice for soil blocking. I also have this trowel that's nice for mixing my soil, smoothing off the bottom of my soil blocker. I really do like this. It was a worthwhile investment, but you don't need it to get started. Before I used this, I borrowed a putty knife from my husband and used that. You can also just use your hand and the side of whatever container you're mixing your soil in. Again, you may eventually want other size soil blocks if you decide this is something that you want to do. For your seed starting area, there are some things that you are going to want and may need, like the lights, heat mats, and humidity domes, other types of trays to make your seed starting area efficient and to get the optimal conditions for germinating your seeds. But you can also start with putting a few soil blocks in a tray on a windowsill. So again, don't think you have to have all of this to get started. You absolutely do not. Another thing that is nice to have is a little watering can with a small spout. Again, not necessary, but one of the reasons that I like this is because I can control where the water goes and I can pour it into my tray around my soil blocks without hitting the top of my soil blocks. And I will show you a little bit later on how to water your soil blocks. But it is nice to have that watering can, but not required. So that's what you need as far as equipment to get started and some optional items. But let's actually get to the soil blocking process. So you're gonna want to set up your station first before you get to starting seeds. So the first thing you're gonna wanna do is get your soil or your seed starting medium and put it in the container that you have. And you're gonna wanna go ahead and get it damp. So I put this soil in here yesterday. It was pretty dry, so I went ahead and added a bunch of water, and you can see, you know, it's pretty damp, but we're gonna want to go ahead and add more water. So put your soil in your container, add enough water that the soil is all nicely damp just to get started. All right, I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more water. I've got quite a bit of soil here, and I want to make sure it starts drying on the, drying up the water and getting nice and damp. All right, so get your soil to where it's starting to get nice and wet in your container, and then get the tray or the plate or whatever you're putting your soil blocks on. Make sure you have that. So your cafeteria tray, whatever it is, have it ready. And next to your workstation. Now mine does have holes in the bottom, so I'm going to put a solid tray underneath it to catch any water that I squeeze out during the process. But if you have a solid bottom tray, you don't have to worry about that. So get your tray ready for your blocks. Have your seeds ready. So whatever seeds you're starting that day, have them ready, and know your germination requirements, and things like how deep do you want to have your seeds. All right, so get your seeds ready, have extra water available, and your soil blocker, and you are ready to start soil blocking. All right, so depending on your container, you're going to want to have several inches of soil. I'm going to move the camera here in a minute so you can better see what I'm doing. But you're going to want to have several inches of soil in your container, and you're going to want to get it pretty wet. This is probably the trickiest part, but don't let it be like, oh my gosh, because again, when I first started learning how to do this, a lot of the videos I watched were like, oh, it has to be exactly this amount of moisture and measure and this, and if it's not this wet, it's gonna be a total failure. Don't worry about that. You can adjust the moisture as you go, and you will start to pretty quickly get a feel for how wet your soil needs to be. Like by the second time you make a block, you'll be like, oh, I need a little more water, or oh, I need to add in a little bit of dry soil so it's not quite as wet. Like you will get a feel for it really quickly. Don't worry about that. It's pretty intuitive once you see how it works. But I'm gonna go ahead and add more water to my tray. Now, if you have a large enough tray like this or a container, what you can do is get one side like really wet, and then if you need to pull soil over from the other side that's a little bit drier to mix in, you can do that. But you can also just grab more dry soil from your bag and add it in on top if you need to. But I get it really pretty good and wet. I mean, you don't want puddles of water, but you want to have it nice and wet to get started. All right, let me shift the camera and I will show you how to do this. All right, this is my soil, and you can see it is nice and wet. If you're like, oh, I don't know, she wasn't super clear on how much water to add, just add some water and try out your soil blocker. You will figure it out pretty quickly. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna take your soil blocker with the bottom, and when you get your soil blocker, play around with it a little bit. There's gonna be this plunger piece. So when you grab here, and I grab with my fingers and I use my thumb to push the plunger down, and you'll see how it works. So play with that a little bit to figure out how it works. But you're going to take the bottom and you're going to push it down into the soil. And I use both hands, push it down into the soil. I kind of rock it back, and you can see it's wet enough that none of that soil stayed in. Okay, but that's okay. So I'm gonna push it down, I'm gonna rock it back, slide it forward a little bit, and push it down again. Now you can see the soil is starting to stay in my blocker. So this is gonna be your first indication of moisture. If you keep pushing it down and every time you pull it up, the soil just falls right back out, it's gonna be too wet. So you wanna add in some of your drier mix. But whoop, that time it fell out. So I am gonna add just a little bit of drier mix it in. And I'm gonna press down, rock it back, press down, and you're kind of grabbing a little bit more each time. Or you can pick it up and just push down in a new spot, and you're just pushing the soil up into the block. You want to compress it and kind of pack it in. So I'm going to just do that a couple times, kind of rocking, pressing it in, pushing down against the bottom of your tray, and then look to see if it's packed in there. So this is packed pretty good. You can use a trowel, a putty knife, the side of your container, whatever you have, to kind of push the soil in one more time and then level it off. So that is where this tool, it is nice, but I got by with using a putty knife for a long time. You can use your hand if you're just doing a small amount, but kind of level the bottom off. And then I will go one more time and push down in the soil to make sure it's packed pretty good. Smooth it off. And then I'm ready to place this in my tray. And this is also where you're going to start to see if you have the right amount of moisture. So I have my tray here. I have the soil's full and packed, and I have my tray. So what I'm going to do, and I'm going to try and demonstrate this to where you can see it, but it might be a little tricky. So what I'm going to do, I start at one side of my tray. I hold this bar with my fingers, and I put my thumb on top of the plunger. The bottom of the soil blocks are on the tray. Right, I'm going to push the plunger down pretty firmly, and that helps pack it down one more time. If you go to push the plunger down and it sinks way down, it means that your soil is not packed in tight enough or it was way too wet. Again, don't let this overwhelm you. This is just helping you understand the process and what you're going to want to feel as you start to pack your soil blocks. It's not difficult. It'll take you practicing a little bit. So kind of just tell yourself, right, this first tray, it's going to be practice. But you will very quickly get the feel for making these soil blocks. I'm just explaining some of the tips and tricks, so don't let it overwhelm you. All right. So if you push the plunger down and it like a ton of water comes out, it sinks way down, you're going to want to just go back to your soil, add in a little bit of drier soil, pack it tighter, and start over. If you push it down and you just get this, like, you feel like you're firmly just kind of snugging things up, that's what you want. All right. And you're going to release the plunger. And now, and this will take practice a few times. That's why you have a practice tray. This time, you're going to want to pull your fingers and your thumb towards each other. And that, as you do that, you're going to be lifting the bottom of the soil blocker up while also pushing the plunger down. And that's how your soil blocks are going to come out. So you're actually more lifting with these fingers than pushing down with the plunger, but you're doing it at the same time. You'll see what I mean. So I'm going to squeeze and I'm lifting up. You can see the bottom of the soil blocker is starting to come up. The plunger's almost staying at the same place, but I'm squeezing together. I let it release it. I push down one more time just to make sure everything is coming out cleanly. Release one more time and then lift up. And there you have your formed soil blocks. Now when you release, you should have a nice tight formed soil block that stays and keeps its shape. If it kind of crumbles and falls apart, you most likely need more water and you need to pack it tighter. So what you'll do is you'll go back and you'll try again, add a little bit more water to your soil mix, pack it tight, and try your next row. And what I would say is leave the first blocks and continue across. And so you can see and even play around with, okay, if I add more water, this is how my blocks look. If I add less water and more dry soil, this is how my blocks are going to look. And really quickly, you'll get a feel for how much water you want to add to get a nice solid block. Now, I don't recommend picking them up, but if you can pick your block up like this, it keeps its shape, it's packed nice and tight. This is what you're going for. A nice, firm soil block. All right. So practice with that, play around with it, figure out how you get it packed in, and work on that movement of compressing and then squeezing together and lifting up to get those nice soil blocks to come out. Don't worry if the first few rows crumble. That happens until you kind of get the hang of that movement, but it's not difficult at all. And you will get the hang of it really quickly and you'll be like, oh, this was so easy. And then is the super fun part, because you get to put on a podcast or an audiobook and just go to town making soil blocks. All right. I think it's fun and relaxing and enjoyable, and I like making soil blocks. So you can fill out your tray or however many soil blocks you need. Sometimes what I will do is, if I'm only starting like 4 or 5 of one seed or just a few and I don't need a full tray, I'll kind of separate the blocks. So I have these 6 basil plants here. I left some separation, and I have sage over here. And then I stick a pot tag. This is lemon basil, so I stick my pot tag in my soil blocks. I got Genovese basil over here with my tag stuck in. So that's how I do if I just have a partial tray. But I may also have a full tray, like these pansies, and it's just a full tray of all one type of pansies, and so I'll make my blocks the whole way across. Now you do want to have a little bit of space in between your blocks. You don't want to put them too close together, but the nice thing is with the metal of your soil blocker, if you put it in, you know, right next to this, just leave a little bit of wiggle room and make your block there, you'll be left with this nice spacing, and that's what helps with the roots and air pruning the roots. All right, let me switch the camera again and we'll go over a few more things. All right, I've got my pretty tray of soil blocks and I am ready to start my seeds. Now, a couple things to keep in mind when you're starting your seeds. This soil blocker has the insert in it that makes this square. Some of them have a little round dibbler. Some of them have pieces that you can change in and out depending on what type of indentation you want in the top. I have found I pretty much stick with this square insert. It does fine for all of the types of seeds I'm starting. And my mini blocker, those blocks fit right in here. So if I'm blocking up, which I'll show you probably in another video, those mini blocks fit right into here. But what you need to know for seed starting is if you have this type of indentation, that's where you can put your seeds, but you don't necessarily want to cover them over to the surface. For a lot of seeds, that's going to be too high or too much soil. So remember, you're going to want to look at your seed packet to see how much soil you cover your seeds with. Over here, of course, these are already germinating, but you can see for the basil, I did have the soil almost to the surface. But for other things like the mint, I did not have it to the soil surface. In fact, I did not cover the mint at all. The sage I did not cover at all. And I've got rosemary up here starting to germinate. Oh, they're so cute. I didn't realize they were growing so well. Those seeds I did not cover at all. In fact, you can see one of the seeds right there. So those I did not cover with soil at all. Other times I will cover the seeds with soil, and you just use the back of the seed packet to determine how much soil to put over your seeds. And what I have found works best is to use semi-dry soil for covering the seeds. So I'll put the seeds in, I'll just grab a handful, I'm not going to show you yet because I didn't put the seeds in, but I'll just grab a handful of the dry soil and sprinkle it over to the depth that I need. It's so much easier than trying to put wet soil in. Just sprinkle it over, and then if you need to, you can use a spray bottle to mist it to get it wet, but I don't even do that. I have found that, actually let me show you, like here with my onions, I sprinkled a little tiny bit of dry soil over the top, and for the most part, it has drawn moisture from the rest of the blocks and is plenty wet for germination. I do use some of these humidity domes, but word of caution with those, if you use humidity domes to help retain moisture in the seeds when they're germinating, take them off as soon as the seeds germinate. Otherwise, you run into problems like damping off and other problems that come from keeping too much humidity and moisture in there. All right, so when you plant your seeds, I recommend using the dry mix to spread over it. And then you're going to want to use something to label with. So I use pot tags that I have from our commercial greenhouse, but you can just use anything that can handle the moisture. If your tray is all the same thing, you can put tape on the outside and write on that. You can use a chalk marker to write on that. Just make sure you label because you will forget what you planted and where. So let me get this planted and then I'll show you a few more things. We have a helper. Hi. You're in the way. Yeah. All right. So when it comes to taking care of your soil blocks and your plants after you've sown your seeds, here's a few things that I've learned. Now, again, I'm using these 10-20 trays, but use whatever you have tray-wise. You are going to want just a little bit of a lip or something on the tray. Again, like a lot of people will use cafeteria trays that you can then water your soil blocks with. For the most part, you're not going to need to water for a while. Your blocks are pretty saturated with water. Again, here's my onions that, they're germinating, they're wet and damp, and you don't want too much moisture. So I typically do not have to water for the first few days, but just keep an eye on your blocks. And if they start to really dry out, you do want to water and keep them evenly watered. Okay, what does evenly watered mean, right? So these are, and actually I don't have any examples of any that need watered right now, but these, you can see they're starting to dry out on top. The edges, you can see they're starting to dry out. I do have a fan that I run in here to help with airflow, and we heat with wood, so our humidity is low, and I do have to, frequently water, but usually it's every few days. And I just look, they're starting to dry out. Occasionally you'll get like one random block that dries out. But what I do is I watch the tray and I look to see if it's starting to dry out and needs watered. And that's when my handy dandy watering can comes in handy, because with this nice narrow spout, you can pour water directly where you want to pour your water, and you're not going to wreck your soil blocks. So soil blocks hold together surprisingly well unless you pour water right on them or drop them or something like that, which I've done. So what you want to do when you water, and these don't need water, but I'm going to pour just a little bit so you can see, is you want to pour the water on the tray and not on the blocks. So now, again, I have two trays. I have this tray with holes and the solid tray underneath. But imagine you just have one tray or one plate, and you're going to pour the water on the plate or the tray, not on the soil blocks. And then they will wick the moisture up from the tray, and it's pretty amazing. It'll wick all the way up to, to the top. And just start adding, add a little bit of water, allow it to wick up, and then come back and add a little bit more water so that you're not over watering. And then if you see the block is fully wet, pour off any excess water that's left so they don't get to be too damp. Again, not overly complicated once you just start to get a feel for how to manage how wet they are. But the key thing is water the tray, not the block. If you do get one random block that dries out, you can just water right around it. Sometimes I'll actually pull it out of the tray if I can carefully and set it in its own tray of water. But for the most part, I try and water the whole tray. That's the easiest, and using that little watering can so that you can put the water on the tray, not on the blocks, especially in a full tray, is helpful. Now, if you do find you overwater, the blocks are too wet, that's where running a fan can help, making sure there's some extra airflow around there to help get the extra moisture out of the soil. But don't panic. Don't panic. You will learn pretty quickly how to manage your water levels in your soil blocks. All right, one other thing I want to talk about is the different sizes of soil blockers. Now, I recommend when you're getting started that you just get one size, probably the 2-inch. But there are other sizes, and there's a couple reasons you might want other sizes. So on the smaller end, I like this mini blocker. It does 20 blocks. And the reason I like that is because I can start a lot of seeds in a really small space. So on one of these trays where I have like 45 to 50 of this size, I can do, I forget, I think it's like 200 of these. Now, they're really small, so you're not going to be growing plants in these for very long. They're hard. They're not really meant to pick up. But look, you can see how small those are, right? So you're not going to have anything growing in them for very long before they're going to need potted up or blocked up into more soil for their roots. But because I can fit so many on a tray, I can start a lot of seeds in a small space using a lot less soil. And this is mainly a factor if you have limited growing space, if you're doing a large number of plants like I am, and if you're starting seeds that have a poor germination rate. So, like some herbs, sometimes pansies, depending on the seed, like I'm going to be starting some eucalyptus later today and some lavender. I'm going to start those in these small blocks because they're known to have poor and slow germination rates. And so I'll plant them in here in a small space, hundreds in a tray. And then after they germinate and I see, okay, which ones are actually going to germinate, which ones are going to thrive, which ones are healthy, then as they're growing and outgrow these, then I will put them in larger blocks. And you take this little block that they were growing in and you set it right inside the bigger block. So that's really nice. Then I'm only using more soil and more space for the plants that germinated and are thriving. And so I like having that option. But this is optional. You don't have to do this way. You don't have to have a mini. Now, there are some soil blockers that are larger. And I guess I should say larger in two ways. So you might be shopping for soil blockers and you'll see soil blockers that actually do a whole tray of blocks. Like the blocker is the size of this tray. It'll do a whole tray in one go. And a lot of larger scale professional growers will use those where they have a ton of space out in their greenhouse. They're doing hundreds of thousands of blocks. And they just can do it at a much higher scale. That's not something you're going to need to do unless you're a larger scale commercial grower. But the other type of larger blocker is where these blocks are actually larger. I think like you can even get some that are maybe 4 inches. And most likely you're not going to need those either. What those are for is if you are growing plants in soil blocks longer, so it gives them more space to grow for a longer time, or if you're growing things like pumpkins, cucumbers, plants that do not like their roots to be disturbed, it can be really helpful to have that larger soil block so that they can grow in there, and when you transplant them, there's going to be less shock. But for the most part, you're not going to need anything that size. But just know that when you're shopping for soil blocks, you might see all of these different options. And that's just kind of what they're for, the different sizes. But if you start with this standard size, you're going to get 4 blocks at a time, of a really nice size. I can grow plants in these for quite a few weeks before they need to be potted up into something larger. And often, if you're starting them at the right time, so you're reading your seed packet, you're keeping notes year to year, and you're starting your plants at the right timing, you can grow them out in this size block, your 2-inch block, and then transplant them right into your garden. So for a lot of things, that's what I do, especially like lettuce and flowers and things. This is the size that I'm growing them out in. But I'm going to make more videos as we go through the season, and I can kind of show you how to know, okay, when do they need blocked up or potted up? When do they need more growing space? And things like that. But you could do a full growing season with just this 2-inch soil blocker. All right, I hope that helps. If you have questions, oh, look, another visitor. Let me know. I'm happy to answer any questions and continue to show you my growing process. And we'll just end by looking at these adorable little pansies. All right, as always, thank you and God bless.